Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. It is a Wednesday, and this is Let's Talk Tropics. We've got a lot to talk about this time around as we have a newly formed hurricane. It became a tropical storm yesterday and has become a a hurricane earlier today with winds at 80 miles per hour, and reconnaissance aircraft are going to be flying in and out of there, and we do think we're going to see some significant intensification here coming up over the next several hours. Could be what we call rapid intensification. Real quick, want to get through the particulars though. Partly cloudy here in Lafayette. We're holding at 89 degrees with a heat index of 96 and that humidity at 57%. We've got a dew point at 72, and we've got a front that's on the way. Our winds are generally out of the north right now, but they're going to pick up out of the north later on after our front passes on by. So check it out as we look at the radar. We did have a severe thunderstorm warning earlier for parts of Jeff Davis, Allen, and portions of Beauregard Parish as this line of thunderstorms is kind of pushing off to the southeast at about 35 miles per hour. A lot of lightning associated with it, and there's probably going to be some gusty winds, maybe up to 40 or 50 miles per hour, and the possibility of some small hail. So if you live in portions of Allen, Jeff Davis, maybe extreme southwestern portions of Evangeline, and then getting into portions of Acadia Parish, you will probably be affected by this storm. So kind of watch out for that as things kind of move along. Quick look outside here in Lafayette. We're looking pretty good. Also in Breaux Bridge and Henderson, we've got a mix of sun and clouds. Traffic seems to be moving along okay on dry roadways. And then as we kind of look here at Ambassador Caffrey, looking off toward the north, there's a little bit more cloud cover there. And there in Henderson, we're kind of looking off toward the west where some of those bigger thunderstorms would be. But you can't really see them there quite yet. On the satellite imagery, you can kind of pick out where our cold front is now starting to move across portions of Louisiana. But of course, what really sticks out there is Hurricane Helene. And just a real quick apology ahead of time if I call it Francine or Hermine. Sometimes when I used to have my boys living here, when you're fussing at your kids, you know, when you don't get the right name after 2 or 3 times, sometimes that happens with me with the number of hurricanes. So if I accidentally if I don't say Helene, or if I say Hermine, or if I see Francine or something like that, just kind of forgive me on that because there's a lot of names we try to remember here. But as far as Helene, it is going to be moving over the southeastern part of the Gulf of Mexico. Today's waters are okay, but with a cold front and then the energy coming in from Helene, I think tomorrow we're going to see some much rougher seas in our offshore waters here locally. But check this out. Helene, which was a tropical storm passing by Cozumel, things are starting to improve a little bit there, but you got some pretty rough seas. Cancun, not a really pretty day with very heavy rains and some gusty winds coming on through there. So there's a lot of these live cams that are up, and you can find those on YouTube. I just kind of searched Hurricane Helene live cam, or you can go to Cozumel live cam. After the broadcast is over, I'll see if I can get these links down in the description below if you want to follow along with those. Of course, I'm going to be pulling up some of those Florida webcams coming up as we go into tomorrow. But look at the Gulf of Mexico satellite. You can see that Hurricane Helene is now starting to get much more organized. It has more of that symmetrical look to it. Hurricane reconnaissance aircraft were out there. They're finding a center of circulation, an eye. It's kind of oval shaped, I guess. And it seems to be a bit open on the east side, but we are going to be seeing this moving over some extremely warm waters, and the wind shear is now starting to kind of release its grip on this. And when you look at the satellite imagery there, and I'm going to kind of pull this one's maybe about an hour old though, because the server has shut down. Everybody's trying to get a hold of some of these graphics here, but you see how it looks like a fan coming out the outside of the hurricane there and kind of going in the opposite direction. We call that divergence. So what you got is you got convergence at the surface where the air is kind of funneling in toward the low pressure area. Then it shoots up the top of the tropical system, and then it shoots outward from the center at the top. That's that divergence. So basically it's just kind of releasing the exhaust. And the easier the storm can do that, the faster it's going to intensify. So not only you got the warm water, but you got that upper level divergence there that's allowing it to exhaust, and therefore with a good system put together, a good engine, I guess, you can see some intensification. And that's why we're a bit concerned about rapid intensification in this area And a lot of it has to do with the warmer waters and the high heat content that's out there. And we'll talk about that in just a minute, but it has been something that's been worrying me about this particular location since the early part of the hurricane season. I've said if something passes over here and it has just the right atmospheric conditions, it can blow up into a monster really, really quick. And that might be what we're going to be seeing here over the next day or so. But there is the latest information, 80-mile-per-hour winds. The coordinates are there on the left-hand side of your screen, and that pressure has dropped to 979 millibars. And much of Florida is going to be impacted by this, even though the cone generally is focusing on the Florida panhandle because it's going to be running parallel, almost parallel to the coast of Florida. We're going to be seeing the hurricane's impacts as well as the storm surge values really starting to pick up there over parts of western Florida. So from the Florida Keys to Naples to Fort Myers to Tampa, and then working your way all the way up, there's going to be a considerable amount of flooding. And there is the storm surge forecast. You can see there in some cases over portions of southwest Florida, you're still looking at 3 to 5 feet, and they're the farthest away from where the hurricane's going to be going in. Tampa Bay, you could see 5 to 8 foot storm surge. That's going to be flooding areas like St. Pete, and then it gets even higher. Now the Big Bend area, this isn't part of the Gulf of Mexico's coast that is very susceptible to storm surge. The layout of the geography there is very similar to what we have in South Louisiana. Very marshy, very low-lying, and the elevation doesn't go up very quickly as you go away from land. So that's why we're very concerned just east of that eye, we could see up to a 15-foot storm surge. Now the good news is as you get down there closer to the coast of the Big Bend area, it's not really very populated, but with the winds coming in, Tallahassee is going to be affected, and even bigger cities like Atlanta could be affected by some of the stronger winds as well as the heavy rains as this hurricane moves in. So I got a couple of questions yesterday about when we look at the direction of movement in the different models. The last couple of hurricanes have had some significant players on the outside that would guide a hurricane, but they were never super strong like the signals we have now. So we've got a low pressure area that's going to be here off toward the west, and a ridge of high pressure here, and really everything is kind of in play to squeeze it in between the two, and then this is going to kind of wrap around that upper level low and bring some clouds and maybe some breezes here in Acadiana over the course of the weekend. Previous hurricanes where there was a little bit more uncertainty, some of those outside players just were not as solid as what we're seeing this time. So all of those outside players that would guide this hurricane have basically remained in place, and that's why the agreement on the track forecast has been so together there. Now the intensity models, always it's a little bit different. We've got one model that's up here still at category 4. The bulk of them are in category 2, 3, and you got some category 1 down to the bottom there. But I really think based on what we're seeing with the National Hurricane Center's forecast, they're going with winds at 125 miles per hour at landfall or just prior to landfall, which is a pretty strong category 3 hurricane. But they're also talking about in some of the discussions that they might have to up that intensity, and some of the computer models that I've seen, especially the hurricane specific models, are going for some rapid intensification, and some of the pressures that I'm seeing is getting closer to 900 millibars, and below 900 millibars is almost unheard of. We've only seen maybe 5 or 6 hurricanes in the Atlantic basin that have dropped below 900 millibars. One was Hurricane Rita back in 2005, and the other one was Wilma also in 2005, and that dropped to a pressure of 882 millibars. It's the lowest pressure ever recorded in the Atlantic basin. Do I think we're going to see something that strong? Probably not, but if you're getting into the lower 900s on pressure, you're starting to talk about category 4, maybe even at times category 5. And part of the reason is not just the water temperatures, but it's what we call the tropical cyclone heat potential, and it's off the charts here over the western part of the Caribbean as well as over here in the Gulf of Mexico. And anytime you have a system that's working over this area, it feeds off of the very warm waters, but it can also feed off the warm waters that are very, very deep, because remember, the hurricane's going over the ocean and it's causing the turbulence. So it's going to kind of churn up some of the waters from below the surface. Well, if those waters continue to stay above 80 degrees, and it's almost like it's just pulling that fuel right off the top and feeding into the storm. So those are the areas where we get very concerned, because there's the potential for rapid intensification. Now, shear has been playing with it over the last 24 hours, although we're now starting to see some signs of relaxing. And the wind shear model here, at least for the current, still is showing some moderate wind shear, but hearing from the reconnaissance aircraft and also seeing what we're seeing on the satellite imagery is kind of showing that the shear is starting to relax. So you'll get that more symmetric shape coming up, and eventually you're going to be seeing an eye, and that's probably going to be coming up very soon. So a quick look at the global model showing just the next 24 to 36 hours, and you can see that the GFS is rolling to the Big Bend. The Euro, which has been the weakest of the models over the last several days, has now come into more agreement with a stronger system. So now, because we've got the track forecast has been kind of locked down, now we have the harder time. The harder problem is to track down what the intensity is going to be. And the Euro has been the outlier, keeping this thing relatively weak, but today it's picked up on that intensity, and you can see you've got a fairly strong hurricane now pressing on in. Canadian model, again, about the same, and the pressures are about the same too, and the Icon model. So basically all four of your global models have a consistent track, and also now starting to see a little bit more consistency when it comes to the intensity of this particular system. So there's the latest GFS model. We're going into the hurricane specific stuff, so that way I could get you a little bit of information here. 954 is what the GFS is predicting, with winds at 81 knots. So 81 knots is just at the top end of a Category 1 hurricane. So that is what we're looking at on that, with a pressure, it looks like 954.8 on there. And as we look at the Euro, as I said, the Euro has kind of picked up a little bit more on the intensity. It was kind of going tropical storm more, but now we're definitely looking at hurricane. Category 1 there, 69.6 knots. So that's right at Category 1 hurricane with a pressure of 958 millibars. Then we look at the HWRF, and again, this is a hurricane-specific model. This has been one of the stronger ones, taking our winds just offshore to 104 knots, so that's going to be running Category 3 with a pressure of 944 millibars, that you can see right there, 943.8, so that's pretty deep. And then the HAFS model, we take this right up to the coast. It's got a pressure of 929, and the maximum wind speed there at 132 knots. So that is right there at the high end of a Category 4 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale. So I'm really thinking that when we get to landfall, we are going to be talking about a Category 3, maybe a Category 4 hurricane. And out in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, if it can get over some of those warm waters with that loop current there, wouldn't be surprised to see this thing ramp up very, very quickly. Could it be Category 5 for a short period of time? There's a possibility, but I think Category 3, high-end, maybe low-end Category 4 is going to be a good bet when it comes to making landfall there over the Big Bend area. Now, where's it going to go after that? So remember, we talked about the tracking and how all the players are in position with a ridge of high pressure over here and a low pressure area over here toward the west. So you got your low there, you got your high over here. So what's going to happen is it's going to squeeze in between that, and then it's going to kind of wrap around that. So the remnants of this system is going to pull up into the Tennessee Valley, and then it's going to kind of get absorbed with this low pressure area in the upper levels back to the west. And the Euro is not much different. You see the two different models here. Really, that's negligible on the different tracks. So the thinking is it's going to go ahead and pull inland, and as it does, it's going to be dumping all of its rain. So even though a lot of people are going to focus on the cone and the exact landfall, the effects of this is going to go way wider than what the hurricane cone is. We already talked about storm surge on the southwest coast of Florida, but then you've got the rainfall potential in all of the panhandle of Florida, going into Georgia, and then starting to get up into the southern Appalachians there. You're getting up into a level 4 out of 4 when it comes to a flood risk, because they're going to be seeing a tremendous amount of rain, but at the same time, you've got mountainous terrain. Once you get into southern parts of Tennessee, western North and South Carolina, there, northeastern Georgia, you're starting to get into more mountainous terrain. They can't handle 20 or 30 inches of rain like other places might be able to do better on that. So this is going to be more widespread than just the coast. So when we talk about these hurricanes, and a lot of folks, the armchair meteorologists, like to talk about, oh, I got it right, I was right on where it made landfall. Well, we don't normally forecast for an exact town or an exact address, because we know the effects of a hurricane are going to be way more widespread than just exactly where that line or where that dot goes. So that's why we try to say, don't focus on the line. You got to focus on the entire system as a whole. Now, there's a lot of other stuff that we can talk about here in Let's Talk Tropics. We've got a couple of other areas that the National Hurricane Center are watching. And one, if you've been watching the show for the past couple of days, you know that this tropical wave here near the Cape Verde Islands has a pretty high chance of development. Right here off of the top, we've got another one right there that has a low end chance for some development as it starts to move out into the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean. So there is the 7-day outlook. We've got Helene, of course, it's going to be in the Gulf of Mexico, and then you've got that wave over the eastern Atlantic that's got a high chance for development and then a low chance for development for the one over the north central Atlantic. But as I've said, again, if you've been with the show for the last couple of weeks, a lot of the extended models have been indicating a very busy start to October, and we're getting the new tropical hazards outlook, which came down yesterday. Unfortunately, it comes down right after the show is over at noon. But you can see in week 2, which is starting a week from yesterday, Tuesday, going through the following week, there's still a fairly moderate chance for some tropical development over the western part of the Atlantic and also down into the western Caribbean and the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And then even looking farther out into week 3, going into October 9th through the 15th, it still has a medium chance for something happening in the Bay of Campeche or the western part of the Caribbean, basically due south of us, places that we don't want to see development, and then still some development out in the central and middle part, western part of the Atlantic, which is getting a little more unusual, because as you get into the latter part of October, you start to see less and less activity out over the middle part of the Atlantic, and we kind of focus in more of what's going to be going on a little bit locally. And again, as we go into October, most of our tropical systems occur in the Gulf, the western Caribbean, and the far western portion of the Atlantic, and things start to shut down off the coast of Africa, going over to the central part of the Atlantic. So our frequency is still relatively high during this time of the year. We're not in October yet, so we're coming here toward the end of September, but you can see that the amount of activity that we have at this time is roughly the same as what we would have during the end of August. And if those of you who've been around long enough know that August and September is always the 2 busy months, but we might be looking at more of a September-October busy season for the 2024 season. We'll just kind of have to wait and see. But if you continue to watch Let's Talk Tropics each and every day, you'll be in the know of what's going to be happening. So, of course, we will be watching what's happening with Hurricane Helene and its development over the course of the day today. So if you want to get updates for Hurricane Helene, I'll be posting those on my social media pages, at Meteorologist Dave Baker on Facebook and at Dave Baker TV on X. And of course, you have found me right here on YouTube. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also turn on those notifications. Well, I hope you have a great day. We'll keep an eye on Helene, and I'll have another update coming up here at about 1 o'clock and a new forecast cone and intensity forecast coming up at 4. I will post those on my social media pages later on today. I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you later on tomorrow. I think it's going to be a cooler and breezy Thursday and a nice weekend ahead. I'll talk to you then.